Okay.
All right. Thank you very much. It's nice to see you, Dr. Patterson. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, I hear you okay.
Okay, great. This is Dr. Cindy Collins with another podcast, graciously completed with me by Dr. Reese Patterson. Many of you have heard our other podcast and know that he is not only a medical doctor, but also a cancer patient. So at this time, he is 95 years old and has been a cancer patient for 34 of the last years. So I'm going to ask Dr. Patterson to give us a short introduction, which will give you an idea of what we'll be covering in this podcast and what the purpose is. So I'm handing it over to you, Dr. Patterson. Thank you.
Okay, it was good to be with you again, Dr. Collins, and I just appreciate the opportunity of talking about cancer and survivorship and so forth. It's been an interesting 95 years. I never thought I would live this long, but I think back, there's so many things that have happened, positive and negative, all of that. But in the long run, I feel that I've gotten an education way beyond what I expected. I'll tell you right now, all the ups and downs, and especially the negative stuff about cancer, that adds so much to my education in general. It sounds kind of perverse, but I've learned so much from cancer. Let me go back in 1935. A wonderful man named Halliburton wrote a book called The Royal Road to Romance. And in there, he told people, it's a wonderful world out here, but do not stay in your backyard. Go out and look for the highway of life, and that will be the beginning of your real education. You may have high school, you may have college, but all that academic stuff is just in the beginning. The real education, though, takes place after that. That's out getting on the highway of life. And that's what I did. I got out of the backyard and started and saw a whole new, beautiful, wonderful world out there because of Richard Halliburton. But as time went on, I began to realize this road of life that we get on, it's not a smooth road, it's bumpy. And the bumps in the early years, when we were 20, 30, and so on, the bumps don't seem too bad, but we deal with them. And that's where the Hans Selye concept comes up of adaptation. We learn to adapt over and over again, adapt, adapt, adapt. But these bumps are big, small, and there may be a hole in the road, or you may fall off into the ditch to the side, but you learn to adapt again. That talent of adaptation is what is so wonderful for our species, or Homo sapiens, because with that, we are here and other human-like creatures didn't make it, especially the Neanderthals. But anyway, as I went down that path, I began to realize that every single bump in the road, whatever it was, I began to learn. My coping ability got better and better and better. And this is true for all of us. The more you do stay on that road and see what you have to deal with, you're developing more and more sophisticated coping methodology. And that will serve us the rest of our lives. However, you might look at this year after year after year of being on the road of life. You might consider this almost a dress rehearsal of something big coming in later. The dress rehearsal, we get better and better at it. But then as years go on, sometime in middle age or later, we begin to have what's called crises. The crisis is going to happen in the lives of all of us. And when it happens, at first we're surprised. But on the other hand, with the methods and the coping ability we develop on the first few years of being on the road of life, this will help us deal with the crisis. And then in my case, and the others, when it happens, you have to use all of those skills, coping skills, to deal with this. Usually it's a major crisis, and usually it's a health problem. If it's health, it may be cancer. And that's what happens to a lot of us. Then when we do that, we've got to approach this with the same analysis, the same coping skills we used in the past for the lesser bumps. But this is a big bump. It's a crisis. And what I found that I had to deal with it in a way that would take all of my experience, all of my ability to handle it. And I found out that I had to adapt, and be creative. First, what I had to do was get into the medical profession. I had to talk to them. I realized that I need to have information. By the way, I don't care what your health problem is, cancer or otherwise. Knowledge is power. You've got to have power. And that power gives you the knowledge to talk to your doctor, have a doctor patient relationship, and you expect him to listen to you and answer your questions. But unless you ask the right questions, you won't know what's going on at all. And so I found that the patient doctor relationship, as we went on, and I learned more and learned more, I began to realize that it was a very complicated thing, but that I had to contribute actively to my survival. I just couldn't wait on the side and leave it up to the doctor, leave it up to the hospital. No, I had to actively participate with the doctor patient relationship in order to be a part of this, because they couldn't do it alone, nor could I do it alone, either one. But this partnership is the key for any kind of a patient cancer problem, whatever. You've got to become informed about what's happening. Only then will you know, in talking to the doctor, what the two of you decide together, not just the doctor, but the two of you decide together about what to do next. What type of outcome you think, and then what's the prognosis? But the patient must be fully informed in order to participate. And that I learned personally. I think it's true of everybody that goes through something like this. But I think that in the field, and we've talked about this before, Dr. Collins, that this may not be exactly when you wanted to bring it up, but to me, the metaphor for all of this is a four-legged stool or chair or table, a four-legged table. I didn't know whether you wanted to talk about that from your standpoint as a health psychologist
Right.
now.
Well, thank you.
Okay.
What I'd like to do as part of our introduction is have you back up just a little bit and tell a synopsis of you getting your diagnosis, being at Sloan Kettering, and then how you then something happened with tennis. I can come back to that too, but that got you so that you were so involved with other cancer patients. That's the piece I'd like to cover now before we really get into adaptation, because that introduction of you at Sloan Kettering, your prognosis and what it was, and then really the tennis is what inserted you into so many other people's lives and made you part of this big community of cancer patients all in the trenches together. Can we just go over a synopsis of that at this
Yeah,
point?
let me go back if I could. When I was sent to Sloan Kettering, that's what would you like me to cover right now,
Let's
and
start
that
there.
is 1987. The doctors here in Knoxville had not much experience with stomach cancer,
Mhm.
and Sloan Kettering probably had been one of the greatest cancer centers in the world. So they sent me up to Sloan Kettering in New York. I've learned from them that I had one of the most vicious, virulent forms of cancer as far as aggressiveness of the stomach that spread up into the esophagus, downward into the small intestine, all through my abdomen. And so they had to do massive surgery, removing the lower half of my esophagus, all of my stomach, part of my intestines, and a lot of the other areas in the abdominal cavity because the cancer had spread there too. My chances of survival, they estimated, would be probably less than 2%. Well, that's quite a hit throw right there. And I began to realize that I need to use all of the coping ability I'd learned on the road of life in order to deal with this. But in order to do it, I need to find out as much as I could about my disease. Also, what to do, all that, what prognosis, I wanted the truth. And that's what I got from Sloan Kettering in a big time. But as time went on, I began to realize when I left the hospital that it was a lot more complicated. When you live without your stomach, you don't have the big area to put food into now. So when I left the hospital, one of the nurses says, well, I'll just tell you right now that you're going to have to eat 5 or 6 small meals a day. And then if you do that, there's no way in the world that you can brush and floss your teeth and you're going to lose your teeth. They'll decay. I said, I can't believe what you're saying to me. I'm going to lose my teeth because I won't be able to have the discipline to brush and floss 5 and 6 times a day. She said, that's right. No one can. I said, if I live a year, come back up here whenever, I will promise you I'll still have my teeth. Dr. Collins, that became a symbol of survival right there for me. And so I think this is something that I could actually participate in and try to struggle for my survival.
Mm-hmm.
Seems silly, but my teeth, that's what I did. Brush and floss after everything I ate 5 or 6 times a day. And when I went up there for checkups, instead of checking the scars all over my chest and my abdomen, they said, open your mouth. And they said, my God, you still got your teeth.
Okay. So
that became a big symbol right there.
That's amazing. And we're going to get into that later too, how these personal things that seem like they might be small are very big symbols for survival. But without getting into a lot of the detail, which we'll do later on the diet and the exercise, just in a couple of sentences, you did manage to start playing tennis again. And so you actually were in tennis tournaments and patients came out to these tournaments. That's how you ended up being called and asked for advice on cancer. Am I correct in that? Is that how that got started?
Well, to go back, I think a message or an introduction of an aspect of my life that is relevant, but which we kind of ignored. My good friend and tennis doubles partner, Stan Ford, and I had won national tournaments in addition to our other activities, but we won national tournaments all over the singles and doubles, and it became a big part of our lives. And then in 1987, I faced a terminal illness. A year later, Stan Ford, my doubles partner, faced his terminal illness with a autoimmune syndrome called Wegener syndrome. We were essentially going to die. We were told, both of us, we were terminal. But the rumor got out that not only were we terminal, but that we had actually died. Now, there we were, 1987, 88, helping each other survive. And we found another symbol that was so important to the two of us. And that was we became fanatics as with exercise. Only though how much the doctors would allow us. We didn't get out of control. But little by little over the next 4 years, we really were able to exercise, get back into tennis at a level we thought not possible, really. 4 years without. So then 4 years later, had no rankings to protect. So we began to travel all over the country again, and we began winning national tournaments again 4 years after we were considered dead. And that was the rumor that got out among in the sports world that Ford and Patterson died in 1987, 89. And it was a rumor, and nobody chose to check to check on it. But then 4 years later, when we started winning national tournament, they thought, wait a minute, there's something wrong here. This doesn't make sense. And so we finally decided to go up to Cedarhurst, New York on Long Island in September of 1991 and play on a surface we had never seen before, and that was grass court.
Right. Now,
national grass court.
Can I interrupt? I want to hold the beautiful details of that story for our examples of adaptation in a minute. I just wanted to use that as a segue into saying, after cancer patients who were there realized, hey, these guys are alive, and then they saw you playing tennis, that's when you and Stan both actually started getting a lot of calls from cancer patients. So here you are, a cancer patient, and now you're able to connect with and have something to offer to so many other patients who are calling you. I know that
Yeah.
you wouldn't want to, you're gonna downplay it, but they saw you as an inspiration. You're surviving, you're playing tennis, you're winning tournaments. So they start asking you about survival and about everyday life, I believe. So that would bring us into our next part of the talk. And that's true, right? That's how they got started with patients.
It was. It just as there were those 4 years, as Stan and I began to really not die, but get better.
Mhm.
Then we found we were able to get to a point where we could turn and help fellow patients. Cancer
Okay.
patients for me, Wegener syndrome for Stan, but
Uh-huh.
we found we were surviving to the point we had time and energy to help other patients.
Mhm.
That was important, and
Good.
we had credibility with
Mhm.
other patients because we had overcome something that we thought had been terminal. That
Okay.
was it. That was so important.
That's
And then
exactly what I was going for. And the fact that you then had something to offer, but it was helping you as well. That's the mutual care that Reese is giving the
absolutely,
patient. So that brings
absolutely.
us into the first stage, what I see as the outsider looking in and hearing your story. The first stage of your adaptation just with cancer itself. Of course, you have a lifetime's worth of series of situations we'll talk about, but for cancer itself, that first stage after diagnosis, you had to switch from your everyday obligations like work, having a busy practice, having a family, etc. You had to switch your attention to survival. So the pieces of
Mhm.
that, how you actually had to become responsibly selfish and really look into your nutrition, your exercise, your stress levels. Do you mind sharing a few details of just that stage with you as a cancer patient?
This was a real shock. Most doctors, I think, feel that the whole world depends on them. You have an overly zealous uh, idea that the world cannot live without you because you're out there to help people. But the problem is you buy into that to a degree that's not healthy. I remember thinking I couldn't say no to any request. I was programmed by society from the 30s and the 40s, 1930s, 1940s, uh, to take care of the needs of everybody else first and myself last. No, I had it backwards. Think about the airplane, and you have a problem, and the oxygen mask comes down, and the flight attendant will say, "You put your mask on first. Then you'll stay alive long enough to help others." I had to learn that the hard way, Dr. Collins. I felt that I had to take care of the needs of everybody else first and myself last. And that, I think, contributed to my cancer right there. I bought into that to such a degree that it was not healthy. I kept going on and on, working, working, working. I felt I was indispensable. And that is an arrogant position that many physicians find themselves into. They think that they're indispensable. The biggest shock for me when I, I had to quit practicing medicine and I talked to one of the secretaries, well, what's going to happen to my patients now? Well, they said we've got another doctor coming in that's going to take care of that and fill in. And I said, well, but would he be okay? She said, he's good. He's well trained. I said, are you telling me that really you're going to make a change here and I'm really not needed anymore? Well, she said, you had a valuable career, but you put into position the transition that had to take place when one of you had to leave. We've done it. Your planning went fine, and now you're on your own and taking care of yourself.
Mm.
I said, I can't believe what I'm hearing. You're making the change without a single hitch.
Mm.
And I said, I can't believe I'm not missed more. She said, but you planned it this way, doctor. You made the arrangement, and now it's bringing the fruition. We got the good people to come in. They're taking care of your patients, and you don't have to worry.
Mm.
That was a real revelation, Dr. Conner.
Mm.
I had no idea that I could be replaced with just a snap of a finger like that. It really kind of hurt my feelings. But I've learned over and over again, I can't afford to be sensitive.
Yeah, I'm sure it was
Be
a shock.
sensitive.
But then you started having to pay attention to things like, what do I eat? I mean, how could you even get enough sustenance to play tennis when you don't have a stomach? How does that work?
Oh, that was a really wake up call. I found out I used to have loved a Hershey bar or something and go to a movie. I'd eat it, not that. But once I had my stomach removed, I tried to go back to a movie and eat a Hershey bar, and I found out I was throwing myself into a self-induced insulin shock. And then I began to realize when I went back the next time, instead of a Hershey chocolate, I got a Snicker, had peanuts in it. That was a breakthrough I had when I began to realize I couldn't just tolerate the sugar, the fat, and the carbohydrate without the protein. Everything that I ate from then to now, 30% of it has to be protein. The protein tends to give me a stable blood sugar level. And that was crucial when I began playing tennis again. I developed a drink made by Arrowhead Milk. And in there came a combination of protein, carbohydrate, and then I supplemented it into a liquid, and I would drink it in my matches. And that enabled me to keep a stable blood sugar, because without a stable blood sugar, you have no stamina. But the protein was a key breakthrough. I couldn't just eat a Hershey bar. It had to be a Hershey bar or Snickers with peanuts in it for the protein. That was a big wake up call for me.
Well,
And then other
amazing how you really discovered that by trial and error on your own,
oh
because
yeah,
they didn't really know what to tell you to eat. You know, I hear that from patients now with gastrectomies, especially a total gastrectomy, having your entire
one
stomach removed.
one quick aside.
Sure.
This really threw me for a loop. I talked to the dietitian up there in New York about the problem I'm having.
Mhm.
She said, "Well, sir, we don't really know what to tell you because we don't have enough of you still alive to know." I didn't want to hear that.
Well, and there's something a lot already, excuse me, there's so many things we're hitting on that other patients can relate to. First of all, having to stop their career, having to shift their attention from other obligations to their own survival, then having a healthcare team that they really might not know what to tell you, especially when it comes to eating. In your case, you know, they may, and then to hear, well, not many of your type of cancer survives. This is such shocking news. I talk to patients all the time that receive that type of information and aren't quite sure what to do with that. I do know one story of hope. I mentioned that you had to study your nutrition, your exercise, and your stress. And I remember that the exercise for you started in the hospital right after surgery with a pair of red shoes. Can you talk about the exercise and
That's,
maybe talk about these red shoes?
that's another symbol, because when we have a potentially terminal illness or a serious illness like cancer, you look for symbols, kind of symbols of survival. And the conservative, depressing white in the hospital got to me. I wanted to go out there where there was color outside. And so I got a pair of running shoes, bright red, and had it brought into me. And thereafter, when I walked up and down the hall every day, every day, every day in my red shoes, they kept saying, "Why you have red?" I said, "Well, that reminds me out there where I want to go." Pretty soon, almost all the patients on that ward brought in color, shoes, whatever, to remind them of the outside world where we all wanted to go so desperately. So that becomes another symbol of hope and survival. I want to get away from the white, sterile environment, depressing of the hospital. That's my goal. And those red shoes took me out. That was a wonderful move right there. But we all need some sort of a hope symbol, and look for it and use it to the hilt. And I learned that over and over again. The symbolism. I learned the diet. I had to stick to it. I'm going to take care of my teeth. I had to learn how to be more gentle with myself. I also made sure that everybody around me would recognize the fact that my number one priority was my physical and emotional survival. I'd never done that before. Before my survival, we were down the list. I took care of the survival of everybody else. But for me to lead a healthy existence, I had to make my physical and emotional survival number one priority. I usually call it learn how to be responsibly selfish. I learned that, but I had to make sure if I don't survive, nothing else is going to happen. That's it.
So all those changes that you're making in the face of these challenges, that's adaptation, making those changes in the face of the challenges. And I imagine you would say this was a great education for you, even though you've been through so much of life. It was a new kind of education on how to adapt to life. Did your illness become an education for you?
Oh, I think my experience with cancer, without a doubt, was one of the biggest educational experiences I've ever had. It made me appreciate what patients go through. It made me appreciate that as we get older and go down the highway of life, bumpy to bumpy to bump. And that coping skill that we develop in the early stages, in the 20s and the 30s on the highway of life, became more and more refined and more capable and more sophisticated. So then when the main event happened with the healthcare, cancer or whatever, I was really better prepared for it then. I knew I could adapt to it, adapt, look for it, find solutions. I found solutions on the road of life. I stumbled sometimes into the ditch off to the side, but I got back on. I knew where to get help. That's what happened with cancer patients. You adapt, and what you want to do is to get with the doctor-patient relationship and get information. Knowledge is power. And if you're not satisfied with that doctor, then you go ahead and get a second opinion or a third opinion. You adapt. You find out what it does it take to get informed. I need information, the information to help me have the power over my life. That's what it was.
Well, so would it be okay or correct for me to look at this type of adaptation here really in two stages that other patients can relate to? That first stage is getting over the shock of it, getting the information you need, getting yourself set to switch your focus now on survival and everything else that you talked about. That it could be your nutrition, your stress management, your exercise, getting into a relationship with your doctor. And once you feel like you are adapting and surviving, maybe for a patient, once they finish treatment, we could say, they moved into the second phase of adaptation, which is now I have time to get better perspective on life. Now I have time to have hope. I have time to help others. And that's kind of where Halliburton's came into your life again, the idea that now I can meet these challenges based on, my track record. Does that sound right to you, and dividing that into two stages?
Yeah, it was. You take it one step at a time. But what was amazing to me, Dr. Collins, is that as I got better and as Stand Forward got better, we found that we had the time and the energy then to help other people. And what I don't think people understand, I'm not a guru up on a platform. I'm not lecturing to people. I'm down in the trenches with other patients learning. I learn from them, they learn from me. And that reciprocity of learning back and forth, we learn from each other. And for me, what I've learned from fellow patients is enormous. But I've absorbed it, I've given it back to them. I've written coping manuals for every kind of cancer there is. But I've learned so much from fellow patients down in the trenches as we there in the trenches surviving and helping each other with coping techniques, swapping. It's a reciprocity is what it is.
See, that's the amazing aspect that I see as an outsider for cancer patients, is how it is an interdependence that's developed from one patient to the other. And it's so powerful. It's so hopeful. It offers hope. It offers a pathway You know, it offers strength to one another, and it's just so powerful the way that happens. So, in your case, and we're trying to talk about the theme of adaptation today because adjusting to cancer is, as you said, it's a main event, you know, to adjust to a health issue in your life. But once you reach this main event, and I try to talk to cancer patients about this, look back to the rest of your life. I bet you've been through many, many challenges that you've met that have given you a track record for this main event. So I have a few picked out from some of the stories I've heard about your life, and I'm going to try to ask you about a few of those. And so I think they're great examples of how, once again, there's a challenge, there's a change, and the person has to meet that challenge in some special way. So the first one that I want to ask about, I guess in a way I'm asking about it because we're dealing with the coronavirus right now. I think a lot of our listeners will relate to this story because they're now learning a lot about viruses. If they didn't already know, just about everyone knows so much more about viruses now. And one of your first stories that I really like has to do with bulbar polio. And so I was hoping you could share that story of adaptation. I think this is just such a remarkable story. So I'll let you take that over.
Well, that probably is one of the most significant crises I could have had in the Korean War in the 1951, 52, 53. I was sent to the Philippines by the U.S. Air Force at Clark Air Force Base, 80 miles north of Manila in the Philippines. Prior to that, I had spending a year and a half at Peter Brigham Hospital at Harvard in Boston, a year and a half of pathology. That pathology is autopsy work, surgical specimens, and all of that, because it's a good background no matter what field you go into. But that was cut short. The Korean War started in the last week in June of 1950. So 6 months later, Air Force activated me, sent me to the Philippines. And there, something happened that changed my life forever.
Mhm.
I did back then general medicine, some orthopedic work, but then we developed the largest epidemic of bulbar polio of any American armed force base in the world. Now, bulbar polio, it hits the lower centers of your brain down below, and you lose the ability to breathe. And if you can't breathe, you can't live. So that's why the iron lung was developed years ago. They call it the respirator now. And the respirator will breathe for you long enough for you to get over it. And usually there are no sequelae, no leftovers if you survive. But you've got to have respirator to survive.
Okay.
The other is peripheral polio. You may survive easily, but you have a paralyzed arm or leg. What happened then? Our epidemic there was so bad that every night people were coming in and they were dying. We only had one respirator at the base, and we had to put them in line. And the ones that couldn't live long enough without the respirator, they died. So then the Armed Forces Institute of Pathology said, have your pathology do autopsies on all the patients die of this bulbar polio. And they said, well, we only have one fellow, but he's not a pathologist. He had a year and a half of pathology up there at Harvard. Find out who he trained under.
Okay.
And the colonel of the hospital, they want to know where you train on who. I tell them it's Walbach up there at Boston. And they said, he's okay. He's one of the best in the nation. Doesn't matter. If he has done autopsies under this guy, he can handle the autopsies here.
Yeah.
Well, that was a big jump. I had to then autopsy the patients in the jungle, a makeshift morgue, and have a Filipino helping me because the Filipinos have a ethnic resistance to polio. I didn't know that.
Okay.
But he helped me night after night. Would have to cut out, do an autopsy. It's a hell of a conversation, but cut out the spinal cord and sometimes the brain and ship it out to the Armed Forces Pathology. They were trying to make a vaccine then for polio. But then all the other doctors in the hospital realized, even though I was taking precaution, cap, gas, nap, gap, the whole bit, protection, gloves, I was going to be infected. And they were afraid to be around me. They knew I was going to develop bulbar polio.
Yeah.
And so I had to be alone and they say, we love you like a brother, but we got to stay away from you. 10 days later, I developed a sore throat. I developed a headache, a stiff neck, and then I knew I was beginning stages of bulbar polio. One of my doctors examined me and said, Reese, you're developing bulbar polio. I said, I know. I said, just keep in mind that don't give me preferential treatment to the respirator. Keep it in line with the others ahead of me. That's it. And I thought really that was the end of my life. But then a funny thing happened. As time went on, 10 days later, my fever went away, my stiff neck went away, and my friend the doctor said, Reese, you're getting better. But why are you getting better? And all the others are dying. I said, I'm not sure. He said, there's something. I said, but be happy for me. He said, I'm happy for it, but medically, I don't get it. Have you ever been in contact with bulbar polio before? Yeah, 4 years ago. We had the biggest epidemic in Memphis, my senior year of medical school, and we had to stay and take care of these young people, teenagers, young people, and cap, gown, and mask, but still we were with them hours and hours. He said that your immune system picked up enough immunity from those young teenagers in that time in the epidemic in 1947 in the city of Memphis Hospital. That has saved your life here a year later in the Philippines, because that has enabled you to overcome the virus because you're getting better. And I got to thinking, my God, I had no idea that all the bedtime stories I told to these children in the hospital who were dying of bulbar polio because we only had one respirator. I didn't realize they were giving me immunity through my immune system by a little dose at a time, a little dose at a time. And that saved my life when I had to do autopsies on all these patients in 1952, 53 at Clark Air Force Base years later. What are the chances of that happening?
Incredible connection besides the adaptation. It's a physical adaptation as well. It's just amazing. And I'm sure they were all, first of all, it was incredulous to them, I'm sure. And then they were just amazed by it.
But as I say, you just never know what will come from something. And I felt like the kids wanted me to come over and tell them bedtime stories. And I just said, well, this is something that I should do. And I did it. But I didn't realize that was going to save my life. 4 years later, in the jungle of the Philippines, doing autopsies on these patients that died. It's amazing.
It's so
just amazing.
So amazing. The next example, actually the next two examples, I kind of have my own title for them. I look at them as situations where two people are unknowingly, unsuspectingly thrown into a situation with each other where each ends up needing to have a certain amount of vulnerability. And then that vulnerability for one person creates a lot of credibility. I mean, that's how I see it now that I'm looking at these different situations. And I think it's the willingness of someone to be vulnerable, first of all, and then or admit a vulnerability, which then they get saved by that is because it gives them some credibility. But there's so many great details to the first one that has to do with what I'll call your escape from Calcutta. But it requires a lot of explanation. So I think we have enough time for this. If we don't have enough time for both of them, I just want the listener to know we will do a part 2 because there's many more good stories like this. But let's go ahead and try to start, if you feel up to it, talking about, and you'll need to explain the background, of course, of why you were in Calcutta and what occurred. But this is another one where there are some synergies that who would have even known you would have been prepared for certain situations. Anyway, I'm talking too much. Let's hear the story.
Well, what happened was when I got out of my training in Philadelphia in ophthalmology, eye surgery, I wanted to go to Northwest India, to the Punjab. In the capital city there is Amritsar, and that's where the Sikh religion is. And the Sikhs are very wonderful people. So I went out there for 6 months. in 1956, from July to December. And I brought with me thousands of dollars worth of equipment. I gave it to them. I showed them Western techniques for cataract surgery and so forth. And then in December of that year, 1956, I flew then to Calcutta, and I get ready to leave because I had to leave because of the time was up. But then they say you cannot leave till you pay income tax on the money that you earned. I said, but I didn't earn any money here. I devoted my time. They said, sir, no one works for nothing in India. You pay income tax on whatever they gave you. I said, they didn't give me anything. I donated my time. In fact, gave them thousands of dollars worth of equipment. She said, no, you can't leave tomorrow and go to Bangkok on the way back. I said, well, what am I to do? I'm stuck here. He said, well, there's a commissioner on the other side of Calcutta. Go, he's the only one that can sign, get you out. Well, I went over there, in a big monolithic British building, big windows, 15 feet high, no screens, no window panes. He said, Commissioner, Raghbir Singh, up on the third floor. I went on the third floor. He's out to lunch. I sat there. Somebody walked by, and I said, well, the commissioner's gone. He'll be back for lunch, I'm sure, 20, 30 minutes. He said, sir, this is India. We take several hours lunch breaks. I said, you're kidding. No, I'm not kidding. Well, I sat down there. I said, what am I to do? I'll have to wait. So I sat down there on the bench next to a window, and I woke up suddenly. I said, my God, I hear ding, ding, ding. I said, that's a badminton shuttlecock. I looked out the window and hear all these lunchtime civil servants out there playing badminton for money, big time money out there, many courts. So I said, well, I might as well, this commissioner, I'm sure, is down there. So I'll go down there and join and see what's going on. So I went down there and I watched him for about a half an hour. And suddenly one team, the guy said to his partner, I have got to leave. I have to go on. He said, look at the money we put, the rupees in this big bowl. We're going to be rich. I've got to leave. So the guy who was left sat down next to me, just really upset. He said, hey, you play badminton? I said, well, are you any good? I said, well, it depends on who you talk to. Now, parenthetically, when I was 14, I played so much badminton, I won the city tournaments over and again in 1940, 1941, 5-2, singles and double. But I didn't want to say anything about that. But he said, well, I'm desperate. Will you be my partner? I said, yeah, okay. We went out there, and Dr. Collins, we were like two guys made in heaven. We beat all the teams, beat them. At the next hour and a half to 2 hours, and the rupees were put into the pot. When we got through, my partner hugged the pot and says, I'm a rich man now. I'm going to be a rich man. And then suddenly he turned to me and says, I should give you some of this. I said, no, it's okay. You keep it because I came here for another reason. He says, okay, I'll keep it. Then he sat down and said, who are you? Why are you here? I said, sir, I'm here to see one of the commissioners about leaving Calcutta tomorrow. What's the commissioner's name? I said, Raghbir Singh. He said, that's me. Couldn't believe what he said. That was the guy I was playing with. Come upstairs. I told him the whole story. He said, Reese, this is the damnedest story I've ever heard, really. It has authenticity, but the thing is, if I do something like this and you're not telling me the truth, then I could lose my job as in the career here. But on the other hand, I feel there is a vulnerability, an authenticity that you have that sounds, you're telling me the truth. I said, why would I lie? Why? He said, I believe you. He signed it. Next day, I went out airport when that night, ready to leave the next day. And then I wrote a letter to the New Delhi Times, biggest newspaper in India, about 400 million people at that time. Now it's 1.3 billion, but 400 million. And I sent a letter to the editor about this wonderful civil servant and what he did for me. And I mailed it to them. Then a month later, he wrote to me in Philadelphia and said, Reese, thank God you were telling the truth. It was all confirmed. And your letter to the editor about me has gone all over India. I'm the most popular, the most talked about civil servant in India today because of what I did for you. And he says, I want to thank you again. But it has immeasurably enhanced my career. How can that happen?
Yeah.
How can all that happen? And yet we both were vulnerable to each other.
Mm-hmm. See, I
I
think
just,
so many patients might hear this story, or just whoever's listening might hear the story, like I did the first time, and think it's so magical, that you knew how to play badminton, he was playing badminton, but that's just one piece of the story. That's a great coincidence, a great synergy that happened. But the other piece, as a cancer patient and someone who can adapt, is that you still had hope. You went to Calcutta having hope that you could speak to the right person and the right person would hear what you had to say. The right person would get you out of the country, and you hung on to that hope even through the long lunch or wherever he was or what was going to happen. I mean, you didn't give up, you didn't give up hope, but you showed vulnerability, and then he showed vulnerability, and
yes,
then you both won. I mean, that's adaptation. I think that's in anybody's life. They can take that situation and apply that to their own life, and just keep their head up and keep their hope. And then, be honest when you need to, just be vulnerable. Hey, this is my problem. This is what I need. And maybe you were so honest, he didn't believe you even at first. That's why he said, you really better be telling the truth. So,
yeah. It's just, I can't believe it all has happened. I just can't. I still got the letter from him he sent to me, thanking me for telling him the truth.
Mhm.
But it's just all of this, though, Dr. Collins, think what this has done for me as far as my education. And Halliburton said, get out there on the road of life, and you will over and over again. It's your postgraduate education. It's far more important than high school or college.
Mhm.
That's what we all gain on the road of life. We learn so much, and I just feel blessed in a way of what I've learned with cancer, not only my own, but what I've been able to learn from other patients. And it has been one of the most important educational opportunities of my life. And that's it. That sounds like a crazy thing to say. My cancer taught me so much, so
Mhm.
much.
So powerful, and so powerful for other patients to hear that can be true, obviously, for everyone. Just stop and examine your life for these things. So because we are coming up on that time, we just created a part two. So we are going to have a part two to this adaptation video. It's going to be a couple of more situations, especially there's one, at least one, that have to do with not only the track record you created through your life, like we all have. If we take the time to look back, we'll see how we've met challenges and created a track record. But we also have a few other adaptation stories after you were diagnosed, even, that are really amazing on how you were able to adapt with the challenges that you met in surviving your cancer. And I hear you say again and again, and I think it's so important that it's not just you in your life and you meeting challenges, it's this what you're learning from other patients, and then we learn from other patients and apply that to our life as well. So
Yes. I just am so grateful to all the patients that have come to me because in the process, Dr. Collins, when they allow me to help them, it's reciprocal. They are also helping me reinforce the concepts that keep me going. I'm indebted that they come to me and talk. We learn from each other, but I've learned so much from them. So much.
mhm.
I
Well, with
wouldn't take
that
it.
being said, I would like to do something now. Everyone who's viewing me, if you're watching the video part of this podcast, you can see my website behind me on what's scrolling behind me, creationbalance.com, because I'd like you to reach out to me with your story if you'd like to share your story, or if you'd like to talk with Dr. Patterson. The best way to reach him is to go through me, and that way I can get the two of you in touch. So my website is creationbalance.com. You're also welcome to directly email me at creationbalance@yahoo.com. But once you get to the website, my phone number, my business phone number, and my email are there. So it'll be easy to find me. And I would love to hear from cancer patients from anywhere. Dr. Patterson has helped cancer patients from all over the world. So you don't need to be in the United States. You don't need to be a patient on treatment. You could be post-treatment. Any story you'd like to share, any question you might have, anything you'd like to bring up for discussion in our future podcast as well, we're open to hearing that. So please contact me as soon as possible. And this will be viewed on Spotify, on any Apple Podcast venues. You can pretty much find us out there. Even on YouTube, you'll be able to see the video aspect. If you're only hearing us in audio today, you'll be able to see us in video if you get to YouTube. And just let us know what you think. We'd love to hear your feedback. It's all about you and, again, the relationship that we can make. So any last parting words before we close it down today, Dr. Patterson? It's been a pleasure speaking with you.
One last little vignette. It's a message of hope for all cancer patients. And you and I have talked about this. But when a cancer patient actively participates in their recovery effort, the quality of life for them will improve. And this may just enhance the possibility of their living longer or even surviving. They've got to become involved and actively participate in the recovery process, because that is a symbolism right there of the greatest hope you can have.
That's so important. And I feel I need to tie that into something you mentioned earlier, and that was the fourth leg on the table. Because as patients know, their treatment can involve, first of all, very likely surgery, then some medical oncology or chemotherapy, and then also radiation therapy is possible. But this fourth leg, the emotional health of the patient, the personal health, the emotion, that it also includes your mindset, your view, your hope level, your nutrition, your stress management. That fourth leg balances out the other four. And I mean, as a physician, I'd like you to have the last say on the fourth leg on the table, Dr. Patterson, how you see the fourth leg in for the cancer patient.
I think this, I love the metaphor of the table as a cancer patient, how you're dealing with it. The four-legged table. The three legs we concentrate on. It's surgery, radiation, and chemotherapy. But the fourth leg is the one that's ignored too much by the medical profession. And that's your field, the health psychologist. What's going on in the mind of the patient? What is their level of knowledge? What is their own willingness to participate actively in their recovery? Or is this for some patient, they want to die. That's their privilege. If they want to die, so be it. We should not take over their responsibility if they decide they want to die, we shouldn't say, oh, no, you've got to stay alive. No, that's their decision. But that gives you a clue about where they're coming from. And that's where the health psychologist will help understand some of the hopes and the fears and the knowledge. They've got to have knowledge about their disease. That's where the health psychologists have stepped in. And they often, their influence in the patient will increase the effectiveness of the other three legs, surgery, chemotherapy, and radiation. You cannot do it without that fourth leg. That fourth leg is important. What is the patient mental state? What can we do to help?
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you so much. We're going to close on that. And everyone, again, contact us if you'd like to, but stay tuned for part 2, where we'll talk more about that, the different types of cancer patients, and also give you some more very interesting examples of adaptation. So very nice to see you today. Thank you for joining me, Dr. Patterson, and I look forward to seeing you again.
It's always a pleasure, and I'm glad we're able to contact and share our information with fellow cancer patients.